Hello, my name is Maria. I'm 35 years old and I live in São Paulo with my husband João and our 2 children. I'm an accountant and work in a medium-sized company in the city center. My life has always been quite ordinary, you know. Wake up early, go to work, take care of the house and family. I never imagined that one day I would be here telling such an unbelievable story. Well, like I said, I've been married to John for 8 years. We met at college and it was love at first sight. After we graduated and got stable jobs, we decided to get married. 2 years later, we had our first son, Pedro. He is 6 years old now and is the joy of our house. A smart little boy, full of energy, always asking questions about everything. For a long time, John and I focused on our careers. We wanted to have a solid financial foundation before thinking about expanding our family. It wasn't easy balancing work, home, and a young child, but we managed it. When Pedro turned 5, we felt it was the right time to have another baby. The news of the pregnancy was received with great joy. I remember telling my parents and in-laws. They were overjoyed. My mom has already started making plans for the baby shower, while my dad joked that he needed to buy more toys for his office. During pregnancy, I underwent all the necessary tests. Everything was going well, seeing my belly growing, feeling the baby's first movements. It was magical. João and I spent hours talking about what our life would be like with 2 children, thinking about names, reorganizing the house for the arrival of the new family member. The birth went smoothly, at least that's what I was told. I gave birth to a beautiful girl, Julia. When I held her for the first time, I felt this immense, inexplicable love. Pedro was delighted with his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her. We returned home and the first few days were the normal adaptation of those who have a newborn. Bad nights, diapers to change, frequent breastfeeds. But there was something different. I wasn't feeling well. I had a discomfort that I couldn't explain. At first, I thought it was just normal postpartum tiredness, but as the days went by, this feeling only got worse. Julia was a calm baby, slept well and cried little. This worried me even more because I knew it wasn't the stress of caring for her that was making me feel bad. There was something wrong. I could feel it. But I never imagined that this discomfort was the harbinger of an experience that would completely change my life and my way of seeing the world. It was a night like any other. João had just put Pedro to sleep, and I was in the room breastfeeding Julia. Suddenly I felt a sharp pain and intense heat spreading through my body. I looked down and saw blood, a lot of blood. I was panicked. "John!" I shouted, my voice shaking with fear. "John, help!" He rushed into the room, and upon seeing the scene, his face turned pale. He quickly took Julia from my arms and placed her in the crib. "Calm down, love. I'll call an ambulance," he said, trying to remain calm, but I could see the terror in his eyes. While João called 911, I tried to stay conscious. The pain was unbearable, and I could feel my strength slipping away by the second. I heard João's distant voice talking to the attendant, giving our address, describing the situation. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. The minutes that followed were a blur. I vaguely remember paramedics coming into our room, asking questions I could barely answer. They put me on a stretcher and took me to the ambulance. João was next to me, holding my hand, whispering words of encouragement that I could barely hear. Inside the ambulance, things started to get hazy. The paramedics' voices sounded distant, as if they were coming from somewhere else. I tried to focus on John's face, but my vision was getting blurry. I felt like I was floating, moving away from my own body. It was then that I had the first vision. 3 luminous figures appeared beside me. Angels, I thought. They emanated a peace and tranquility that I had never experienced before. His presence was comforting, like a warm hug on a cold day. One of the angels approached and placed his hand on my shoulder. I didn't feel the physical touch, but a wave of warmth and well-being invaded me. He spoke not in words, but directly to my mind. "It's time to choose, Maria. Do you want to come with us or stay?" At that moment, I realized I was between 2 worlds. Part of me desperately wanted to stay. I thought about João, Pedro, little Julia, who barely knew her mother. But another part, a part I didn't even know existed, longed to go with the angels. The peace they offered was too tempting. I looked at João, who was still holding my hand, begging with his eyes for me to stay. I heard the paramedic saying something about blood loss, about my vitals dropping. But it all seemed so distant, so irrelevant compared to the choice I had to make. "I want to go," I told the angels, surprising myself. The words didn't come out of my mouth, but they resonated in my being. The moment I made that choice, I felt immense relief. All the pain, all the fear, all the worry just disappeared. The angels smiled, not with their lips, but with their entire being. An intense light began to envelop me, and I felt myself being pulled away from my body, from the ambulance, from everything I knew. The last thing I saw before I completely surrendered to that light was João's face, a mixture of fear and love in his eyes. And then, everything changed. When the light dissipated, I found myself in a place that defies earthly description. It was like I was floating in an infinite space, but at the same time I felt completely grounded. The colors around me were vibrant, alive in a way I had never seen before. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just a vast expanse of light and pulsing energy. The three angels who accompanied me from the ambulance were there, their ethereal forms glowing with a soft, comforting light. They didn't speak with words, but I could perfectly understand everything they wanted to communicate to me. It was as if our thoughts were connected, flowing freely between us. One of the angels, the one who had placed his hand on my shoulder in the ambulance, approached. His presence radiated love and understanding. "Welcome, Maria," he communicated. "Are you ready for your journey?" I didn't know exactly what to respond, but before I could form any coherent thoughts, I found myself being guided through this incredible space. We passed through what appeared to be different regions of this spiritual plane. Each had its own vibration, its own energy. In a moment, we found ourselves in a place that I can only describe as an immense library. But it was no ordinary library. The books were actually spheres of light, each containing what appeared to be a person's complete life story. When I approached one of these spheres, I was flooded with memories, emotions, and experiences of someone I had never met, but who suddenly felt as familiar as my own life. Other spirits were there, some looking as amazed as I did, others with a serenity that suggested they were already familiar with this place. I talked to some of them, again, not with words, but through a kind of telepathic communication. We share stories, learnings, reflections on our earthly lives. The knowledge and wisdom that flowed in that space was overwhelming. After the library, we went to a place that reminded me a little of a playground, but infinitely more beautiful and peaceful. Children, or rather children's spirits, played and laughed, their laughter sounding like the purest music. The joy and innocence that emanated from them were contagious. A figure that appeared to be some kind of spiritual grandmother approached me. His smile was warm and welcoming. "Children are precious," she told me. "They remind us of the purity and unconditional love we all have within us." As I watched the children, I felt a pang of longing. I thought about Pedro and Julia. Grandmother must have sensed my thoughts, because she gently placed her hand on my shoulder, or whatever my body was in that plane, and said, "A mother's love is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Your children still really need this love on the earthly plane." His words hit me like lightning. Suddenly, all the peace and serenity I had been feeling was replaced by a deep sense that I had made a mistake. I couldn't abandon my children, my husband, my earthly life. I still had a lot to do, a lot of love to give. I looked at the angel guiding me, my thoughts in a whirlwind. He smiled understandingly and said, "You understand a great lesson, Maria. Sometimes we need to see things from a different perspective to understand our true purpose." At that moment, I knew I had to go back. But before I could express this desire, the angel said to me, "There is one more thing you need to see before you make your final decision." And so, we were transported to another place, a place that would completely change my understanding of not only my own life, but the destiny of all humanity. The scenario has changed drastically. Now I found myself in a place that seemed to be some kind of cosmic observatory. In front of me was what I can only describe as a giant screen of energy, pulsing with images and information. The angel who guided me turned to me, his face now more serious. "Maria," he began, "what you are about to see is of paramount importance. It is a vision of the future of Earth and humanity. It is crucial that you understand this before making your final choice." Images began to form on the energy screen. I saw scenes of natural disasters, devastating hurricanes, earthquakes that shook entire cities, floods that engulfed coastal regions. It was scary and heartbreaking at the same time. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice or thought shaking. "The Earth is undergoing a great transformation," the angel explained. "What you see are the birth pangs of a new era. It's the end of one cycle and the beginning of another." The images have changed, now showing scenes of political conflicts, scandals being revealed on a global scale, economic systems collapsing. It was as if all the hidden secrets and corruptions were coming to the surface at once. "This feels like the end of the world," I murmured, feeling a deep sadness. The angel smiled gently. "It's not the end, Maria. It's a new beginning. See?" The screen then showed images of people coming together, helping each other amid the chaos. I saw communities forming, based on principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Revolutionary technologies emerging, capable of cleaning up the environment and providing clean energy for everyone. "What you are seeing is the awakening of human consciousness," the angel explained. "Through these hardships, humanity will learn valuable lessons about compassion, unity, and the true meaning of being human." I was amazed at the resilience and adaptability I saw in human beings. Even in the face of the greatest adversity, there was hope, there was love. "But why does all this need to happen?" I asked. "Why so much suffering?" The angel responded in a voice full of compassion. "Growth often comes through challenge, Mary. The Earth and humanity need to go through this purification to ascend to a new level of existence. It is like gold that needs to go through fire to be purified." The images continued to flow, showing a future where technology and spirituality coexisted in harmony, where people lived in peace with nature and each other. It was a vision of a world I could barely imagine, but which now seemed not just possible, but inevitable. "Understand, Mary," the angel continued, "every soul on earth at this time has an important role to play in this transition. Some have come to be beacons of light in times of darkness, others to help rebuild after old structures fall, and still others to be bridges between the old and the new." I was silent for a moment, taking in everything I had seen and heard. It was a lot of information to process, but somehow, it all made sense in a way I had never experienced before. "And what is my role in all this?" I finally asked. The angel smiled. "Your role, Maria, is something you will have to discover for yourself. But know that every act of love, every moment of compassion, every choice made with conscience contributes to this great change." I looked again at the images of the future, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension. "How long will it take for all this to happen?" "Time is different here than on Earth," replied the angel. "What may seem like a long period of time to you is just a blink of an eye in eternity. The important thing is that this change has already begun." At that moment, I felt a deep certainty that I needed to go back. There was so much to be done, so many people to help, so much love to share. My heart was filled with a purpose I had never felt before. "I'm ready to go back," she told the angel. "There is a lot of work to be done." The angel nodded, his eyes shining with approval. "Remember, Maria, you will not be alone. We will always be by your side, guiding and protecting. And when the time is right, we will meet again." With those words, I felt a wave of gratitude and love wash over me. I was ready to return to my life, with a new understanding and a new purpose. The decision to return was made, but the return process was not instantaneous as I imagined. It was as if I were floating between two worlds, aware of both the spiritual and the physical. I found myself back in the hospital, hovering over my own body. The scene was surreal. Doctors and nurses moved frantically around the gurney where I was lying. Machines beeped, tense voices gave orders. João was there, leaning against the wall, his face pale and his eyes red from crying. I wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that I would be back, but I couldn't communicate. It was then that I noticed something extraordinary. Next to the doctor working on my body was one of the angels who had accompanied me on my spiritual journey. The angel did not directly interfere, but seemed to guide the doctor's hands with a gentle light. It was as if he was whispering instructions, although the doctor didn't seem aware of his presence. "It's time to return, Maria," said the angel, turning to me. "Your work here is not finished. Remember everything you have seen and learned." I felt a gentle tug, as if an invisible string was pulling me back into my body. As I got closer, the feeling of peace and lightness I had experienced on the spiritual plane began to dissipate. I began to feel pain, discomfort, the weight of physical existence. For a moment, I hesitated. The idea of leaving that infinite peace to return to the pain and limitations of the physical world was terrifying. But then I remembered my children, my husband, the mission that I now knew I had to accomplish. With one last look at the angel, who was smiling encouragingly, I dove back into my body. The sensation was intense and overwhelming. It was as if every cell of my being was awakening, reconnecting. I opened my eyes, blinking against the bright hospital light. The previously muffled voices around me now sounded clear and loud. I felt a hand squeezing mine. It was João. "Maria, thank God," he exclaimed, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I lost you." I wanted to tell him everything I had experienced, everything I had seen. But my throat was dry and the words wouldn't come out. Furthermore, how could I explain something so profound and transcendental? The doctor approached, checking my vitals. "Welcome back, ma'am," he said with a tired but relieved smile. "You gave us quite a scare." In the days that followed, I stayed in the hospital to recover. Apparently, I had suffered severe postpartum hemorrhage and barely survived. The doctors talked about miracles and luck, but I knew it was much more than that. As I regained my strength, I tried to process everything that had happened. The experience had been so real, so vivid. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination caused by blood loss, I was sure of that. But how to share something like this? How could I explain that I had seen the future of humanity, that I had been in the presence of angels? I decided to keep most of the experience to myself for now. I just told João that I had had a near-death experience and that I had seen a light. He seemed relieved that I was okay, but I could see in his eyes that he knew there was more to the story. When I was finally discharged and returned home, it was like I was seeing everything with new eyes. Every detail of everyday life, Pedro's smile, Julia's cry, the aroma of breakfast, seemed charged with a deeper meaning. I was back, yes. But now he knew it was much more than just Maria, the accountant, wife, and mother. I was a soul on a mission with a greater purpose to fulfill. And although the path ahead seemed challenging, I felt prepared and, most of all, grateful for the second chance I had been given. The first few months after my return were, to say the least, challenging. Physically, my body was still recovering from the traumatic experience. There were days when I felt weak, tired, as if the simple act of getting out of bed was a Herculean task. Doctors assured me it was normal, that my body needed time to heal completely. But the physical challenges were just the tip of the iceberg. The real challenge was in my mind and my spirit. How do you return to your normal life after having experienced something so extraordinary? How do you worry about bills, work meetings, and household chores when you have seen the spiritual plane and the future of humanity? I often found myself looking out the window, lost in thought, recalling details of my experience. The peace I felt, the wisdom I received, it all seemed so far away now. There were times when I doubted myself. Did it really happen? Or was it just a very vivid dream caused by the trauma? João noticed the change in me. Sure, I was expected to be different after a near-death experience, but I think he realized there was something more. One night after the kids had gone to bed, he sat next to me on the couch and held my hand. "Maria," he said softly, "I know you've been through something intense, something I may not be able to fully understand, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what it is." I looked into his eyes, full of love and concern, and I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I wanted so much to share everything with him, tell him about the angels, the spiritual library, the visions of the future, but words seemed inadequate, insufficient to describe the magnitude of what I had experienced. "John," I began, my voice shaking a little, "I saw things that completely changed my view of the world, of life, of everything. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here anymore." He squeezed my hand, encouraging me to continue. "But at the same time," I continued, "I know that I have a purpose here, that I came back for a reason. It's just, sometimes it's hard to reconcile what I saw and felt there with the reality of everyday life here." João pulled me into a tight hug. "I don't know exactly what you've been through, love, but I know you're strong. Whatever you need to do, whatever your purpose, we're in this together. Me, Pedro, Julia, we're here for you." Your words were a balm for my restless soul. I realized that even if I couldn't share every detail of my experience, I had the support and love of my family, and that was incredibly comforting. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to make a conscious effort to integrate my spiritual experience with my everyday life. I started meditating regularly, seeking to reconnect with that sense of peace I experienced on the spiritual plane. I started to value small moments more: a hug from Pedro, Julia's toothless smile, a cup of tea shared with João at the end of the day. I also started looking at the world around me more closely. News that before only left me worried or frustrated, I now saw in a new light. I remembered the visions of the future that the angel had shown me. I knew that the difficulties and challenges we saw in the world were part of a larger process of transformation. At work, I surprised my colleagues with a new attitude. Problems that previously left me stressed, I now faced with calm and determination. I started looking for ways to make our work environment more harmonious, more compassionate. Small changes, true, but I knew that each positive action contributed to something bigger. A colleague, Mariana, noticed the change and commented during lunch, "Maria, you look different, more serene, you know? What happened?" For a moment, I considered telling her about my experience, but something told me that it wasn't the right time yet. Instead, I smiled and replied, "Let's just say I had an experience that made me reevaluate many things in life. I realized that we have the power to make a difference, even with small gestures." Mariana seemed intrigued, but did not pursue the matter further. However, in the days that followed, I noticed that she also seemed more reflective, as if my words had awakened something in her too. As time passed, I felt more comfortable in my new skin. The Maria who returned was not the same one who left, that was certain. But little by little, I was learning to integrate my spiritual experience with my earthly life. I knew I had a long way to go. The visions of the future that the angel had shown me were still vivid in my mind, and I knew that significant challenges awaited humanity. But now, instead of fear, he felt a calm determination. I was ready to do my part, no matter how small, to help with the great transformation that was coming. And so day after day I continued my journey, a journey of rediscovery, of purpose and love, a journey that, I knew, was just beginning. As the months passed, I realized that my near-death experience had left deep marks not only on my worldview, but also on my emotional state. There were days when I felt incredibly connected and at peace, as if I could feel the presence of angels around me. In those moments, everything seemed to make sense, and I felt full of purpose and love. But there were other days days when the longing for what I experienced on the spiritual plane was almost unbearable. The absolute peace, the unconditional love, the feeling of being completely connected to everything. These memories sometimes left me with an immense emptiness. The earthly world, with its limitations and challenges, seemed harsh and cold in comparison. On one of those difficult nights after the children had gone to bed, I found myself crying silently on the porch at home. John found me there, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the stars with tears in my eyes. "What's wrong, love?" he asked softly, sitting down next to me. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Sometimes I miss it so much, João. What I saw, what I felt there, it was so beautiful, so perfect. And here everything seems so complicated, so imperfect. João hugged me, and we were silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You know, Maria, I can't even begin to imagine what you saw or felt. But I know one thing. You came back for a reason. Maybe the imperfection here is exactly where you need to be right now." His words touched something deep within me. He was right, of course. I had chosen to return. I had a mission here, a reason to be in this imperfect world. But that didn't make the longing any less real or painful. In the days that followed, I began to realize that these emotional swings were affecting not only me but also my family. Pedro, always sensitive, began to ask me why I seemed sad sometimes. Julia, although still a baby, seemed to sense my restlessness, becoming more agitated on the days when I was more melancholic. I realized I needed to do something about it. I couldn't continue living between two worlds like that. It was then that I decided to seek professional help. Finding a psychologist who could understand my experience was not easy. Many seemed skeptical or tried to explain everything in purely physiological terms. Finally, through a recommendation from an online support group for people who have had near-death experiences, I found Dr. Camilla. Our first session was intense. For the first time since returning, I was able to speak openly about everything I saw and felt. I told him about the angels, the spiritual library, the visions of the future. I talked about the indescribable peace I felt, and how difficult it was sometimes to deal with the reality of the physical world after experiencing it. Dr. Camilla listened to me with attention and empathy. When I finished, she said something that stuck with me. "Maria, your experience was extraordinary, but your mission is now ordinary, in the best sense of the word. It is to live each day, each moment, bringing a little of that light you saw into this world." Over the next few weeks, we worked together to find ways to integrate my experience into my everyday life. I learned mindfulness techniques that helped me find moments of peace even on the busiest days. I started keeping a diary, where I could freely express my thoughts and feelings, including the longing I sometimes felt for the spiritual plane. One of the most important things that Dr. Camilla helped me understand was that it was okay to feel this longing. It wasn't something I needed to overcome or eliminate, but rather accept as part of my journey. "Think of this longing as a reminder," she told me in one of our sessions. "A reminder of the love and peace that exists beyond this physical world, and that you are now on a mission to bring some of it here." This shift in perspective was transformative. Instead of feeling torn between two worlds, I began to see myself as a bridge. Every time I felt that longing for the spiritual plane, instead of letting it get me down, I looked for ways to bring some of that energy into my daily life. I started doing small acts of kindness, a smile for a stranger on the street, a word of encouragement for a stressed-out coworker, an extra hug for Pedro when he came home from school. Each of these gestures, no matter how small, made me feel more connected to that loving energy I experienced during my near-death experience. João noticed the change. One night, as we were washing the dishes together, a task I had previously found tedious but now saw as an opportunity for mindfulness, he commented, "You seem more lighter, Maria, more at peace." I smiled at him, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I'm learning to bring a little bit of heaven to earth," I replied, knowing he might not fully understand, but feeling he would get the essence. Sessions with Dr. Camilla also helped me deal with the knowledge I had about the future, the visions the angel had shown me of natural disasters, conflicts, and great changes, sometimes weighed heavily on my mind. There were days when I would turn on the TV and see news that seemed to confirm those visions, and fear would threaten to overwhelm me. Remember, Dr. Camilla told me when I shared these concerns, the future is not written in stone. What you have seen are possibilities, not absolute certainties. And every choice we make, every act of love and compassion, has the power to shape that future. These words became a mantra for me. On days when the news seemed particularly bleak, I repeated it to myself, reminding myself that I had a role to play in creating a better future. Gradually, I began to feel a profound change within myself. The longing for the spiritual plane was still there, but no longer like a sharp pain. It was more like a sweet memory, a source of inspiration. And every day I felt more able to bring a little of that light into my life and the lives of those around me. My emotional healing journey was far from over, I knew that. But now I had the tools and understanding to keep moving forward. And most importantly, I had a new sense of purpose. I was no longer torn between two worlds. I was bringing them together, one small act of love at a time. As I continued my journey of integration and healing, I began to notice significant changes in my relationships with those around me. My near-death experience had not just affected me, but was having a profound impact on all of my relationships. With João, our connection deepened in ways I never imagined possible. Although he could not fully understand what I had experienced, his patience, support, and unconditional love were instrumental in my emotional recovery. I began to see our marriage in a new light, not just as an earthly partnership, but as a shared spiritual journey. One night, as we lay in bed talking about the day, João surprised me with a question. "Maria, do you think that what happened to you, well, do you think it changed the way you see me? How do you see our wedding?" I was silent for a moment, reflecting. "Yes, it has changed," I answered honestly, "but not in the way you might be thinking. I see our love now as something much bigger than just the two of us. It's as if we were two notes in a cosmic symphony, different, but harmonious. And together we are creating something beautiful not just for ourselves, but for the world." João was silent for a while, absorbing my words. Then he smiled and shook my hand. "I don't completely understand it, but I like that idea. We're a symphony." With the children, my relationship also changed. I began to see Pedro and Julia not just as my children, but as old souls in young bodies, each with their own purpose and journey. This made me more patient, more present in my motherhood. One day, while playing with Pedro in the backyard, he surprised me with a question. "Mommy, where do we go when we die?" For a moment, I was speechless. How can you explain something so complex to a 6-year-old? But then I remembered the simplicity and beauty of what I had experienced. "You know, Pedro," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I believe we are going to a very beautiful place, a place full of light and love where we meet all the people we love and who have gone before us." Pedro's eyes widened. "Have you been there, Mommy?" I smiled, feeling a wave of emotion. "Yes, darling, I have been, and that's why I know we don't need to be afraid. But you know what? I also know that we have a lot to do here, in this world, before we go there." Pedro seemed to think about this for a moment, then smiled and went back to playing. But I noticed that, from that day on, he seemed gentler, more aware of his actions. It was as if our little conversation had planted a seed of spiritual awareness in him. My friendships were also affected. Some people walked away, unable to deal with the new Maria. Others, surprisingly, came closer. Mariana, my coworker, became a close friend. Although I hadn't shared all the details of my experience with her, she seemed to sense that something profound had changed in me. One day during lunch, Mariana confided in me. "You know, Maria, since you came back from the hospital, there's something different about you. It's as if as if you have an inner light, and being around you makes me wanting to be a better person. His words touched me deeply. I realized that even without explicitly talking about my experience, I was impacting those around me in a positive way. At work, my new perspective began to influence how I handled daily challenges. Conflicts that previously stressed me out, I now saw as opportunities for growth and learning. I started introducing small mindfulness practices into our office routine, like a moment of silence before important meetings to center ourselves. My boss, Mr. Ricardo, a man usually focused only on results, noticed the change. In an evaluation meeting, he commented, "Maria, I don't know what happened, but you brought new energy to the team. The environment is lighter, more productive. Keep it up." Those words made me realize that my mission, to bring some of the light I experienced into this world, was coming true in ways I couldn't even imagine. Even my relationships with strangers have transformed. I began to see every interaction, no matter how brief, as an opportunity to spread a little love and compassion. A smile for the supermarket cashier, a kind word for the stressed-out bus driver, small gestures that I knew could make a big difference. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the bank, I noticed an elderly woman who seemed confused and anxious. Instead of ignoring her as many were doing, I approached her and asked if I could help. We spent the next few minutes talking, and I helped her resolve her banking problem. When we finished, she held my hands and said with tears in her eyes, "You are an angel, my dear, a true angel." Those words resonated deeply with me, not because I considered myself an angel, but because they reminded me of the beings of light I encountered during my experience. I realized that in a way I was channeling some of that angelic energy into the physical world. As time went on, I started to notice a ripple effect in my social circle. The people around me seemed kinder, more aware, more connected. It was as if my transformation was inspiring a collective transformation, albeit on a small scale. This realization filled me with hope. I remembered the visions of the future that the angel had shown me, a future of greater awareness and compassion. I realized that this future was not something distant and unattainable. It was being built here and now, through every act of love, every gesture of kindness, every genuine connection between people. And I, Maria, a simple accountant who had an extraordinary experience, was doing my part in this great transformation, not through great actions or eloquent speeches, but through the way I lived my everyday life, the way I related to the people around me. This realization brought a new sense of purpose and joy to my life. The longing for the spiritual plane was still there, but now it was accompanied by a deep gratitude for the opportunity to be here, in this moment, making a difference in any way I could. At night, as I watched João playing with the children, I felt a wave of love so intense it almost took my breath away. I realized that this simple moment, this everyday scene of family love, was sacred. It was a glimpse of heaven on earth, and in that moment I knew for sure that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. My journey was far from over, but each step was an opportunity to bring a little more light into the world.